The escape and first contact. The cold metal walls of the cargo bay trembled as the ship prepared for takeoff. Hidden in the shadows, Eerie, a small alien girl, clutched her knees to her chest. Her violet eyes flickered with fear, and her tiny body shook. The deep hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the floor, a sign that it was about to leave the planet. She had no choice but to run. Back on her home planet, humans were called monsters. They were known for war, destruction, and cruelty. Eerie had grown up hearing stories of how they crushed entire planets and wiped out civilizations. Her people, the Virillians, feared humans more than anything. Yet now, here she was hiding inside a human cargo ship, alone, with nowhere else to go. She had sneaked in while the humans were loading supplies. She had watched them from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment. They had laughed and talked with each other in a strange but smooth language. Their movements were strong, confident, but not as brutal as she had imagined. Still, she couldn't trust them. If they found her, she was sure they would kill her without mercy. As the ship lifted off, Eerie felt her body press against the floor. The sudden force made her dizzy, but she stayed silent. She knew she had to be careful. If the humans found her now, she would not live to see another sunrise. A dangerous discovery. Minutes passed, then hours. Eerie stayed hidden behind a stack of metal crates, her breathing slow and careful. The room was filled with supply boxes and strange tools, but there was no food, no water. How long could she survive here? Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten in days. Her throat felt dry, her body weak. She knew she had to find something, anything, to stay alive. Slowly, she crawled out of her hiding spot, moving like a shadow. She saw a small metal container near the door. Maybe it had food. Just as she reached for it, the door hissed open. Eerie froze. A human stood there. Tall, broad, dangerous. His uniform was dark, his boots heavy. A blaster hung at his side. His face was sharp, with deep brown eyes that locked onto her in an instant. Eerie's heart pounded. She was trapped. The human took a step closer. His gaze studied her, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then, to her surprise, he did not draw his weapon. Instead, he raised his hand slightly, as if trying to calm a frightened animal. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was deep but not unkind. Eerie's mind screamed at her to run, but her body refused to move. The human sighed and pressed a button on the wall. "Captain, we have a situation in the cargo bay." More humans were coming. Surrounded by humans. Within minutes, 2 more humans arrived. One was a woman with short blonde hair and sharp blue eyes. She wore a captain's uniform, her posture straight and powerful. The other was a young man with messy black hair and a curious look in his eyes. He seemed much less dangerous than the others. Eerie pressed herself against the wall, her small hands clenched into fists. She knew it was over. They would kill her now. Maybe they would throw her into space. The captain crossed her arms. "She's just a kid," she muttered. The first human, the one who had found her, nodded. "Virillian, I think." The younger human, the one with messy hair, crouched down. His voice was gentle. "Are you hurt?" Eerie did not understand. Why were they speaking to her like this? Where was the anger? The violence? Her body trembled as she finally found her voice. Please," she whispered, her alien accent thick. Don't hurt me." The young human's eyes softened. "We're not going to hurt you," he said. "We just want to know why you're here." Eerie could not believe it. Humans were supposed to be ruthless killers. But these humans, they were calm, patient, almost kind. She was so confused. The human way. The captain let out a sigh and rubbed her forehead. "All right," she said. "We can't just throw her out. She's weak, scared, and probably hungry." Hungry. At the sound of that word, Eerie's stomach growled loudly. She felt her face heat up with embarrassment. The messy-haired human chuckled. "I'll get her something to eat," he said, standing up. The captain nodded. "Fine, but keep an eye on her. If she causes trouble, we can't risk keeping her here." Eerie felt the weight of those words. They didn't trust her. And why should they? She was an alien, a stowaway. As the young human returned with a plate of food, he placed it on the floor and slid it toward her. "Here," he said. "Eat." Eerie looked at the food suspiciously. Was it poisoned? A trick? The young man took a bite from his own plate, showing her it was safe. Hesitantly, Eerie picked up a piece and took a small bite. Warm, soft, delicious. She ate slowly at first, then faster. The humans watched her, their expressions unreadable. For the first time, Eerie began to wonder, had everything she learned about humans been a lie? As she finished the meal, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not hunger. Hope. But deep inside, she knew one thing. If her people found out she was with humans, they would never forgive her. And if the humans found out why she had really escaped her planet, they might not forgive her either. Trapped among monsters, the hum of the spaceship felt different now. It was no longer the quiet, cold hiding place that Eerie had crept into. Now it was alive, filled with humans, filled with the very creatures she had been taught to fear. She sat curled up in the corner of a small crew lounge, her arms wrapped around her knees. The humans had given her food, let her rest, and even allowed her to stay, for now. But she did not trust them. Not yet. The messy-haired human, Kai, had been the most curious about her. He kept watching her, his green eyes filled with something she couldn't quite understand. Was it kindness? Amusement? Or was he just waiting for the right moment to betray her? Eerie kept her guard up. She was trapped on their ship. If they changed their minds about her, she had nowhere to run. A different kind of prison. The captain, Reed, had given strict orders. Eerie was not to be harmed. Eerie was not to wander the ship alone. Eerie was not to touch anything dangerous. To her, it felt like a prison. Kai sat across from her, munching on a strange round fruit. He had tried talking to her a few times, asking her where she was from, how she got here, why she was hiding. She had given him nothing. Now he was just staring at her. "You're really small," he finally said. Eerie narrowed her violet eyes. "You're really big." Kai laughed, taking another bite of his fruit. "Fair enough." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So, are you going to tell me why you're here, or do I have to keep guessing?" Eerie stayed silent. He sighed. "Okay, I'll guess. You stowed away because you were running from something. Not just for fun, right?" Still, she said nothing. Kai tilted his head. "Maybe your own people." Eerie flinched. Kai's eyes widened slightly. "Oh." He sat back, rubbing his chin. "So I was right." Eerie glared at him. "You don't know anything." "I know scared when I see it," Kai said simply. "I've seen enough refugees to recognize one." That word, refugee, made Eerie's stomach twist. Was that what she was now? A runaway? A coward? Or was she just trying to survive? Are humans really that different? The door slid open, and Captain Reed stepped in. His sharp green eyes studied her for a long moment before he spoke. "You'll have to earn your stay here, kid," he said. "We don't have room for freeloaders." Eerie straightened. "I didn't ask to stay." "No, but you also didn't ask to be thrown out the airlock," Reed said flatly. "And yet, here we are." Her breath hitched. Was that a threat? Kai rolled his eyes. "He's not serious. He just talks like that." Reed crossed his arms. "You're small. Quick. You could help in engineering. Kai will watch over you." Kai grinned. "Guess we're teammates now." Eerie scowled. "I don't work for humans." Reed's face remained unreadable. "Then you don't eat human food." Her stomach betrayed her by growling. Kai smirked. "Welcome to the crew, Eerie." She clenched her fists. This was temporary. She was not one of them. A new world. The ship, the Horizon, was bigger than she expected. Kai took her through the hallways, showing her different rooms. She memorized every exit, every vent, every possible hiding place. If things went wrong, she needed to be ready. "This is the mess hall," Kai said, pointing to a room filled with humans eating and talking. Eerie stopped at the entrance, frozen. So many of them. Laughing, joking, not acting like killers at all. A burly man with dark skin and a thick beard noticed her. "Is this the little stowaway?" Kai nodded. "Yep, she's helping out in engineering." The man chuckled. "That's new. Didn't think we'd be hiring aliens." Eerie bristled. Her instinct told her to snarl, to show her fangs, to prove she wasn't weak. But the man didn't look angry. His eyes were warm, his expression curious. "Name's Briggs," he said, extending a hand. "Welcome aboard." She stared at the hand. What was he doing? Was this a trick? Kai nudged her. "You shake it." Eerie hesitated, then reached out and touched his hand, only to be crushed in his grip. She yelped, jerking away. Briggs laughed loudly. "Don't worry, kid," he said. "You'll get used to us." Would she? Did she even want to? The first test. In the engine room, everything smelled of metal and heat. Sparks flew as mechanics worked on different parts of the ship. Eerie had never seen humans work like this before. Kai handed her a small tool. "Here, you can help me tighten these." Eerie glared at the tool, then at him. "I don't take orders from humans." Kai smirked. "Cool. Then I guess you don't eat human food either." Her ears twitched. He was using her own words against her. She snatched the tool from his hand. "Fine." As she worked, she noticed something strange. The humans worked as a team. They didn't just follow orders blindly. They helped each other, laughed, argued, solved problems together. This was not how her people worked. Her people followed orders. Her people obeyed. Maybe humans weren't so different after all. A silent decision. That night, as she lay on a small cot in the cargo hold, she stared at the ceiling. She had spent her life fearing humans. Now she was living among them. She had two choices: keep fighting, keep resisting, stay an outsider forever. Learn, watch, adapt. Eerie closed her eyes, breathing deeply. For now, she would choose option 2. But she still had a secret. A secret that, if the humans found out, could change everything. The human way of war. Eerie had spent the last few days watching, observing, learning. She had not yet decided if the humans were truly different from what she had been taught, but every day, they surprised her. They laughed together. They argued but never seemed to hate each other. They were not bound by a rigid hierarchy like her own people. No one obeyed out of fear. They followed orders because they trusted their leaders. She still didn't trust them. Not fully. But something inside her was beginning to shift. And then the ship was attacked. A sudden danger. The Horizon was cruising through deep space when the alarms blared. Unidentified ships detected. Shields up. Eerie had just finished eating in the mess hall when she felt the ship lurch. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Conversations died. People jumped to action without hesitation. Battle stations. Eerie's heart pounded as she followed Kai toward the bridge. "What's happening?" she asked. Kai's usual easygoing expression was gone. His face was tense, focused. Pirates. Maybe worse. Worse. The bridge was alive with movement. Holographic screens displayed 3 incoming ships. The captain stood at the center, his green eyes hard as steel. "Identify them," Reed ordered. The tactical officer checked the readings. "They're not pirates." No known markings. A sinking feeling hit Eerie's stomach. She knew what this meant. Bounty hunters. And they weren't here for the ship. They were here for her. Hunted. Eerie clenched her fists. How had they found her so fast? Her people had powerful sensors, but the Horizon had been moving through uncharted space. There was no way they should have known she was here. Unless someone had sold her out. But who? The thought made her stomach twist. The tactical officer's voice broke through her panic. "They're hailing us." Reed's jaw tightened. "Put them through." The main screen flickered, revealing a Virilian bounty hunter. His dark skin was patterned with golden tattoos, his sharp eyes piercing through the screen. "Captain Reed," the hunter said, "you have something that belongs to us." Reed's expression didn't change. "Sorry, can't say I do. But I appreciate the polite greeting." The hunter smirked. "The girl. Give her to us, and no one gets hurt." Erie froze. The crew turned to look at her. Her lungs tightened. This was it. This was where they betrayed her. She had been a fool to think otherwise. Then Reed's voice cut through the silence. "No deal." Erie's eyes snapped to him. The bounty hunter's smirk disappeared. "You don't understand, Captain. That girl is a criminal. She belongs to us." Reed tilted his head. "That's so. What's her crime?" The hunter's expression darkened. "That is not your concern." Reed grinned, but there was no humor in his eyes. "See, that's where you're wrong. She's on my ship. That makes it my concern." Erie's breath caught. He was protecting her. The hunter's face twisted with frustration. "Captain Reed, don't be a fool. If you refuse, we will take her by force." Reed's expression turned to stone. "You're welcome to try." The screen cut off. The next second, the ship shook violently. They had opened fire. The human way of war. Erie braced herself as the ship rocked. The tactical officer shouted, shields holding at 82%. Reed didn't hesitate. Weapons online. Return fire. The Horizon's guns roared. Erie had seen battles before. Her own people fought with overwhelming force, crushing enemies in minutes. But the humans? They fought differently. They were strategic. They dodged, countered, adapted. They did not just fire blindly. They worked together, covering each other's weaknesses. And something else was different. They did not fight to kill. They fought to survive. Even when an enemy ship was critically damaged, they didn't finish them off. Instead, they disabled weapons, knocked out engines. Erie couldn't understand it. Why not destroy them? Why show mercy? She didn't realize she had spoken the question aloud until Kai answered, "Because that's not who we are." She turned to him, eyes wide. Kai shrugged. Killing should be the last option, not the first. Erie had no words. Her own people would never think like this. A choice in the fire. The battle raged on. The bounty hunters were losing, but they refused to retreat. Reed's voice cut through the noise. "They're getting desperate. Tactical, focus fire on their engines." Another explosion rocked the enemy ship. Their thrusters flickered. "They're disabled, Captain." Reed's face was unreadable. "Hail them." The screen flickered again. The bounty hunter appeared, his face filled with rage. "You've lost," Reed said. "Surrender." The hunter sneered. "You think you've won. She's marked. More will come. You cannot protect her forever." Erie shivered. The bounty hunter was right. This was only the beginning. Reed's eyes locked onto hers. He studied her for a long moment, then turned back to the hunter. "She's crew now," he said. "Come after her again, and we'll be ready." The screen cut off. Erie couldn't breathe. Crew. He had just claimed her as one of them. No hesitation. No doubt. No one had ever done that for her before. The aftermath. Hours later, the ship was quiet again. The crew was exhausted but victorious. Erie sat alone in the cargo bay, staring at the floor. She was safe, for now. But how long could this last? Humans had fought for her, protected her, risked their lives for her. And for the first time, she wondered, was she willing to do the same for them? She wasn't sure. But she would have to find out the dark truth about her own people. A restless mind. Erie lay awake in the dim light of the cargo bay, staring at the metal ceiling. She had been given a proper crew quarters, but she had refused it. She wasn't one of them. Not really. But the battle had changed something. The humans had fought for her, risked their lives for her, and Reed had called her crew. Crew. That word should have meant nothing to her. She had never belonged anywhere, not even among her own people. But for the first time, she wondered, did she want to? The cold shiver ran down her spine. No, she could not think like that. She had a secret, a dangerous truth, and if they ever found out, the kindness they had shown her would turn to hate. She could never let them know. But soon, she wouldn't have a choice, a past that won't stay buried. The next morning, Erie was in the engine room, working alongside Kai. She had started helping the crew, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way to avoid suspicion. Kai had been her shadow since the battle, always watching her, always making sure she wasn't left alone. He was suspicious, and he was right to be. "Hey," Kai said, nudging her. "You okay?" Erie blinked. "What?" "You've been tightening that bolt for, like, 5 minutes." She looked down. Her hands were shaking. Kai frowned. "Erie, I'm fine." Kai didn't believe her, but before he could say anything, the ship's alarm blared. A message flashed across the screen. "Incoming transmission, ENCRVTED." Reed's voice came over the intercom. "All crew to the bridge." Now, Erie's stomach dropped. She already knew. They had found her. Her people were coming. The transmission. The crew gathered around as the screen flickered to life. A face appeared. Erie's blood went cold. It was Commander Valrix, the leader of the Virillian security forces, her people's top enforcer, and the one person she feared most. "Humans of the horizon." His voice was deep, emotionless. "You have taken something that belongs to the Virillian Empire." Reed stood firm. "She doesn't belong to anyone." Commander Valrix's sharp golden eyes landed on Erie. "Traitor," he hissed. Erie's breath caught in her throat. The entire crew turned to look at her. And in that moment, she knew. She could never run from this. The truth comes out. Kai was the first to speak. "What is he talking about, Erie?" She didn't answer. The screen flickered, and suddenly, files appeared, stolen data, classified reports. They filled the bridge's holotable. The crew stared at the images. Reed narrowed his eyes. "What am I looking at?" Commander Valrix's voice was filled with contempt. "Erie is not just some runaway child. She stole valuable intelligence from our highest command." Kay's voice was quiet but sharp. "Erie, is that true?" Erie's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to lie. She wanted to run. But there was nowhere left to go. So she told them. "I stole the truth." The room went silent. A corrupt empire. Erie stepped forward, her voice shaky but firm. "My people, they're not the victims of war," she said. "They started it." Reed's expression darkened. Erie swallowed hard. "The war with humans. It wasn't because we were defending ourselves. It was because we wanted control. We wanted your technology, your ships, your resources, so we attacked first." Silence. Erie forced herself to continue. "I found records, battle reports, evidence that the Virillian government covered up the truth. They told our people that humans were monsters, that you invaded our space, that we had to fight back." Her voice trembled. "It was a lie. We were the monsters." Kai took a step back. "So you ran?" Erie nodded. "I tried to expose the truth, but before I could, I was caught. Labeled a traitor. If I go back, I'll be executed." The crew exchanged glances. Briggs, the burly mechanic, crossed his arms. "So we saved a fugitive." Erie flinched. Reed didn't take his eyes off her. "And now your people want you dead." She nodded. Reed took a deep breath, then turned back to the screen. "Well, that's not happening." Commander Valrix's expression darkened. You would defy an empire for this creature. Reed smirked. Wouldn't be the first time. Commander Valrix's face twisted in anger. This is your final warning, Captain. Hand her over, or be destroyed. The screen went dark. A single red light flashed on the control panel. Incoming attack. Betrayal and escape. Reed turned to the crew. Battle stations. Now. The crew sprang into action. Erie stood frozen. This is my fault. The Horizon was a cargo ship, not a war vessel. If the Virillians launched an assault, the crew might not survive. She turned to Kai. I have to go. Kay's face darkened. What? Erie swallowed. If I leave, they won't attack. They only want me. Kai shook his head. You don't get it, do you? We don't abandon our own. She stared at him. I'm not one of you. Kay's jaw tightened. Then why did Reed risk his life for you? Erie had no answer. Before she could say another word, the ship shook violently. The attack had begun. A final choice. Explosions rocked the ship. The shields were failing. Reed's voice came over the intercom. Erie, get to the escape pods. That's an order. Her chest tightened. They were protecting her. Again. She had spent her whole life running. And now she was running again. She turned, ready to obey, ready to leave them behind. Then she heard Kai scream. She spun around just in time to see him thrown across the bridge, his body slamming against the metal wall. Pain shot through her chest. Something inside her snapped. For the first time in her life, she felt something stronger than fear. Rage. She grabbed a fallen blaster, turned toward the enemy, and fired. The betrayal and the chase. The fire of battle. The horizon shook under the force of another blast. Sirens screamed through the corridors as sparks rained from damaged control panels. The Virillian warships were relentless, hammering them with precision strikes. Erie gripped the blaster in her hands, her breath ragged. She had never held a weapon before, never thought she would need to. But now, everything had changed. Across the bridge, Kai lay motionless against the wall, his body limp from the impact of the explosion. Something inside Erie snapped. She was done running. She had spent her whole life fearing humans, believing they were ruthless monsters, just as her people had taught her. But now, the only monsters she saw were the ones hunting her down, her own kind. She turned sharply to Captain Reed, who was gripping the control panel, blood trailing from a cut on his forehead. What's the plan? She asked. Reed glanced at her, surprised. You're staying. Erie clenched her jaw. I'm not leaving my crew behind. A slow smirk tugged at the corners of Reed's lips, even as the ship rumbled under another impact. Good answer. Briggs, the ship's mechanic, shouted over the alarms. Shields at 27%. We can't take another direct hit. Erie's sharp Virillian eyes scanned the battlefield through the main screen. 3 enemy warships surrounded the horizon, boxing them in like predators circling their prey. The Virillians weren't here to negotiate anymore. They wanted her, and they were willing to destroy everyone to get her. No, not again. She had already lost one home. She wouldn't lose another. Erie took a step forward, gripping the edge of the tactical console. There's a way out. Reed raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Erie's mind raced. She knew Virillian war strategies better than anyone. If she was right, they were using a formation trap, keeping the horizon boxed in to force them to surrender. But if she could find the weakness in their net, her fingers moved swiftly over the holographic controls, scanning the positioning of the ships. Then she found it. A gap, a tiny, deadly opening. If we divert power from the shields and push thrusters to max, we can break through here. She pointed at the map. They won't expect us to charge straight at them. Briggs frowned. Without shields. That's suicide. Erie shook her head. It's the only way. Their targeting systems take 3 seconds to adjust. If we time it right, we can be gone before they react. Reed exchanged a glance with Briggs, then nodded. Do it. Briggs cursed under his breath, but started rerouting power. Erie turned to the control panel, fingers flying over the keys. If she was wrong, they would all die. But if she was right, hold on, Reed shouted. With a sudden roar, the Horizon lurched forward, pushing straight toward the smallest enemy ship. The warship tried to adjust, its cannons glowing as it attempted to fire. Too slow. The Horizon ripped past them, narrowly avoiding a plasma blast that could have torn them apart. For one terrifying moment, the entire ship shook violently, metal groaning as they scraped past the enemy's flank. Then, silence. The alarms still blared, but when Erie looked at the scanner, they were clear. We did it, Kai groaned, struggling to sit up. His voice was weak, but his grin was still there. That was insane. Erie exhaled, her legs suddenly weak. They were alive. For now. The price of freedom. But the celebration didn't last long. Captain, the tactical officer called out, his face pale. They're not pursuing. Erie frowned. That wasn't right. Virillians never let go of a target. Then the screen flickered on, and her blood ran cold. Commander Valrix was back. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, on the screen, were prisoners, humans, captured from another vessel, bound in chains. Erie's heart stopped. This is what happens when you defy the Empire, Valrix said smoothly, eyes locking onto Reed. You may have escaped for now, but others will pay the price. On the screen, one of the prisoners, a human woman, was dragged forward. She was beaten, but still defiant. Let them go, Reed said, his voice cold and dangerous. Valrix smiled cruelly. Bring us the girl, and they live. Erie's fists tightened. Her past had finally caught up to her. And now, others were suffering because of it. Reed's jaw clenched. We don't negotiate with slavers. Valrix chuckled. Oh, Captain, you are a fool. His expression darkened. You have 1 hour to decide. The screen went black. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Briggs slammed his fist into the table. Damn bastards. Kai looked at Erie, his expression unreadable. What do we do? Erie already knew what she had to do. She had run for too long. This time, she would face them. She turned to Reed. I'll surrender. No. Reed's voice was absolute. Erie's fists clenched. This isn't just about me anymore. Reed narrowed his eyes. No, it's not, which is why we won't let you go. Kai folded his arms. Yeah, we just pulled off an insane escape for you, not about to throw that away. Erie stared at them, stunned. She had expected them to be angry, to call her a liar, a traitor, to hand her over. Instead, they were protecting her. Again. She had been willing to sacrifice herself for them, but they had already made their choice, and they refused to let her go. A plan that might kill them all. We can't fight them head-on, Reed said, pacing. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Erie took a breath. But what if we don't fight? Kai raised an eyebrow. You got a better idea. Erie turned to the tactical console, her mind racing. Yes, she said. We trick them. She pointed to the star map. There's an abandoned station nearby. Old Virillian tech. If we fake a distress signal and lure them inside. Briggs whistled. We could turn their own system against them. Erie nodded. Exactly. Reed smirked. I like it. Kai grinned. Let's make them regret ever coming after you. Erie's chest tightened. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She wasn't hunted. She was fighting for something bigger than herself, and she would not let them down. The ultimate sacrifice, a desperate plan. The bridge of the Horizon was eerily silent as Captain Reed and his crew stared at the tactical display. The Virillian warships hung in the void like hungry predators, waiting for their prey to surrender. Waiting for Erie. The human prisoners, beaten, shackled, and barely able to stand, were held hostage by Commander Valrix. His ultimatum was clear: give up Erie, or the prisoners die. But Reed had already made his decision. "We're not handing you over," he said firmly, turning to Erie. Erie's fingers curled into fists. "And what happens when they start executing people? How many will have to die because of me?" Reed met her gaze, unshaken. "We're going to save them. All of them." His confidence sent a strange warmth through Erie's chest. Why do they care so much? She had never been part of anything before, never had anyone fight for her, but there was no time to dwell on it. She straightened, focusing on the battle map. "We only have one chance," she said. "If we try to fight them head-on, we die. But if we get them to chase us, we might be able to turn the tables." Kai leaned against the console, arms crossed. "You're saying we bait them?" Erie nodded. "There's a derelict Virillian research station in the nearby nebula. It's been abandoned for years, but I know its systems inside and out. If we can lure them inside, we can trap them." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "You sure it still works?" Erie hesitated. "I don't know, but it's our only shot." Reed turned to the crew. "Then let's make it count." The chase begins. The horizon jumped to full speed, streaking toward the nebula. As expected, the Virillian warships followed, their sleek, dark hulls cutting through the stars like blades. The crew worked furiously, diverting power to the engines, reinforcing shields, preparing for the deadliest gamble of their lives. Kai stood beside Erie at the tactical station. "So, let's say we actually make it inside this haunted station. How do we stop them from just blowing us to bits?" Erie took a breath. "Because I'm going to activate its defense grid." Kai blinked. "The defense grid of an abandoned station. That's ambitious." "It's not just any station," Erie muttered. "It's one of our old war labs. It was designed to eliminate intruders. If I can access the system, I can make it turn against them." Briggs let out a low whistle. "Dan, I like this plan." Reed smirked. "Then let's give them something to chase." Into the maw. The nebula swallowed them in a swirl of purple and gold, gas clouds twisting like phantom hands. The old Virillian station emerged from the mist, an enormous skeletal structure floating in darkness, its metal hull covered in battle scars. Erie's stomach twisted at the sight of it. She remembered this place. This was where her people had built weapons of war, where they had experimented on prisoners, where they had turned soldiers into monsters. It was one of the reasons she had run. Reed glanced at her. "You okay?" Erie exhaled slowly. "Let's finish this." The Virillian warships followed them inside, moving cautiously. Valrix wasn't a fool. He knew a trap when he saw one. But he also wanted Erie too badly to turn back. That was his mistake. The betrayal. As soon as the Horizon landed in one of the station's old docking bays, Erie sprinted to the central control room. She powered up the station's systems, fingers flying over the dusty console, hacking into the old defenses. The station came to life, metal groaning as ancient security turrets powered up. Erie's pulse pounded. Come on, come on. Then, the doors slammed shut behind her. She spun around. A gun was pointed at her head. Kai. But not her Kai. His face was different, colder, and his eyes weren't his own. It took her only a second to recognize what was happening. Mind control. Her people had experimented with it before. Neural parasites, injected through forced implants. They had perfected it over years of war. And now, Kai was one of their puppets. His voice was flat, lifeless. You should have surrendered. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Valrix had planned this. He had sent the prisoners as a distraction. While the crew focused on them, his agents had already infiltrated the Horizon. And Kai had been the perfect target. Erie couldn't move. If she reached for her weapon, Kai would shoot. If she ran, he would kill her. I can't hurt him. But then, bang. A plasma shot rang out. Kai stumbled, a burn mark on his shoulder. Eerie turned sharply and saw Reed standing in the doorway, gun still raised. "Move," he ordered. Eerie hesitated. "But he's not in control," Reed snapped. "And if we don't shut down whatever's in his head, he'll kill us both." Eerie's hands shook. She knew how to stop it. She had seen it before. But the only way was dangerous, and Kai might not survive. Reed fired again, stunning Kai before he could shoot. He crumpled to the floor. Eerie rushed to him. He was breathing, but barely. "We need to get him back to the ship," she said, her voice tight. Reed's calm crackled. "Captain, the station's defenses are live, and they're tearing the Virilians apart." Eerie's head snapped to the screen. The warships were caught in a storm of their own making. Turrets blasted holes in their hulls. Security drones swarmed them like locusts. They had fallen into the trap, but so had the horizon. "The system's out of control," Eerie shouted. "If we don't stop it, we'll all die here." Reed nodded, then shut it down. Fast. Eerie's hands flew over the console. "Override. Override. Override." A timer appeared on the screen. "Self-destruct countdown. 5 minutes." Her breath caught. No, no, no. The station was programmed to wipe itself out if its defenses failed. It was too late to stop it. They had 5 minutes to escape. Eerie grabbed Kai, lifting him with Reed's help. "We have to go. Now." They ran. Through the collapsing corridors, through fire and falling metal, through the chaos of their own making. They barely made it to the horizon before the station erupted into fire. The explosion ripped through space, swallowing the warships in a blinding inferno. And just like that, the battle was over. The cost of victory. Kai was still unconscious. The crew was bruised, shaken, but alive. Eerie sat beside Kai's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. She had almost lost him, and it was her fault. Reed stood at the doorway, arms crossed. "You did good, kid." Eerie didn't answer. Reed sighed. "You saved us. You saved all of us." Eerie closed her eyes. She had won. But at what cost? And for the first time, she wondered, what if she wasn't running anymore? What if she was finally home? The final truth, the broken beginning. The medical bay of the horizon was filled with a soft, rhythmic beeping, the sound of Kai's faint heartbeat echoing in the silence. Eerie sat beside him, her small fingers clenched into fists on her lap. His face was pale, his breathing slow. The neural parasite that had hijacked his mind had been removed, but the damage remained, and it was her fault. She had thought she could outrun her past, thought she could escape the war her people had created, but instead it had followed her, infected her crew, nearly killed her only friend. How much more would she cost them? The door slid open, and Captain Reed stepped inside. His sharp green eyes landed on Kai, then on Eerie. "He's stable," Reed said. "He'll wake up soon." Eerie didn't respond. She couldn't. Reed sighed and leaned against the wall. "You blaming yourself for this?" Eerie's ears twitched. She didn't look up. "It was my people who did this." Reed shrugged. "Yeah, but you're not your people, are you?" Eerie's throat tightened. Wasn't she? Wasn't she just as guilty? Wasn't she part of the empire that had tortured, controlled, and destroyed everything in its path? Reed watched her for a long moment, then finally spoke. "You have a choice, kid," he said. "You can keep running, or you can make sure this never happens again." Eerie's heart pounded, because deep down she already knew. She had one last thing to do, and it would mean going back home. The final mission. The Horizon's crew gathered in the war room, standing around a holographic map of the Virilian capital world, a planet covered in towering black spires, home to the most ruthless government in the galaxy. Eerie stepped forward. "This war started because of a lie," she said. The Virillian people believe they are the victims. They believe humans started this war. She tapped the controls and data logs flashed onto the screen. Evidence of her people's deception. Secret communications, hidden battle plans, orders from high-ranking officials to attack first. Gasps rippled through the crew. Even those who had fought Virillians for years looked stunned. If we can broadcast this to the Empire, Erie continued, we can end this war. For good. Briggs frowned. And how the hell do we get this past their security? Erie took a breath. We don't. I do. Reed's expression darkened. Absolutely not. Erie clenched her fists. I have access to the Imperial archives. I know the back doors, the firewalls. If I can get inside, I can upload this directly to their planetary network. Kay, who had finally woken up just hours before, crossed his arms. And what happens when they catch you? Erie hesitated, because she already knew the answer. They'll kill me, she admitted. The room fell into silence. But then, not happening, Reed said. Erie's head snapped up. What? Reed folded his arms. We're going with you. She stared at him. That's suicide. Reed smirked. We do a lot of suicidal things around here. Briggs cracked his knuckles. Guess we're heading to the Virillian homeworld then. Erie felt something tighten in her chest. She had never been protected before. Never had anyone stand beside her, fight beside her. And now, for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. Infiltrating the enemy. The Horizon approached the Virillian capital world under the cover of a stolen military clearance code, one that Erie had memorized before she fled. The city below was massive, towering spires stretching into the sky, their dark metal exteriors glowing with blue neon lines. Landing secured, the pilot announced. Erie exhaled. No turning back now. She, Reed, Kai, and Briggs stepped off the ship, disguised as Virillian officials and their prisoners. The guards barely glanced at them as they walked through the main security gate. But Erie's chest tightened as she stepped onto the streets of her homeworld for the first time in years. Nothing had changed. The people moved in strict formation, heads down, voices silent. The same fear that had ruled her life as a child was still here, controlling everyone. And she had been one of them. No, not anymore. She lifted her chin. It was time to break the cycle. The broadcast that changed everything. They reached the Imperial data hub without issue. Erie moved fast, bypassing firewalls, cracking encrypted gates, forcing her way into the system. Lines of code blurred in front of her eyes. She had one shot. The moment she uploaded the data, every citizen in the Empire would see it. The war crimes, the betrayals, the truth. Her hands trembled over the final command. Kai put a hand on her shoulder. You sure? Erie exhaled. Then she pressed the button. UPOA complete. The holographic billboards flickered to life outside. Giant screens across the city lit up with images of secret war meetings, hidden attack orders, everything the Empire had done to start the war. The streets fell silent. For the first time in history, the Virillian people saw the truth. The fall of an empire. The response was immediate. Riots erupted across the city. Virillian citizens, once obedient soldiers, turned against their leaders. Security forces collapsed. Generals fled. And Commander Valorix, the one who had hunted Erie for so long, was captured by his own people. Erie watched it all from a rooftop, stunned. It was over. The war was over. Kai grinned. We actually did it. Reed nodded. Damn right we did. Briggs smirked. Not bad for a bunch of rebels. Erie stared at the skyline, her heart pounding. She had thought this would be the end. That after this, she would have nowhere to go. But when she turned to look at the crew beside her, at her crew, she realized she was wrong. She had a home. And she was never going to run again. Epilogue. A new beginning. The Horizon left the Virillian capital behind, flying toward a new future. Erie stood on the bridge, watching the stars. Kai leaned beside her. "So, what now?" Erie smirked. "I hear there's a galaxy full of adventure out there." Kai chuckled. "Guess we better go find it." Reed grinned from the captain's chair. "Strap in, crew. We're just getting started." The engines roared to life, and the horizon shot into the unknown. And for the first time, Erie wasn't afraid. She was home.